You're watching the Technado podcast. It's week 20. We're going to talk about Intel processors. We've got Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019 updates that have come about and other news from around the world. Big topic this week is going to be email, PGP security, and what you need to know about the eFail exploit that was released this week. Lots of buzz talking on that. So if that's interesting to you, stay tuned right here for week 20 on the Technado podcast. All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to Technado, the podcast brought to you by ITProTV, where we take a look at the news, what's happening, and other technology information going on around the technology scene. I am your host, Don Pizzette. I was out last week. I apologize for that. Peter and Daniel Lowry filled in for me, which I appreciate. This week, we've got Peter out, right? Yes. Our rotating podcast host. So Wes Bryan was thankfully willing to join me and be ridiculed on the podcast.
Absolutely, man. I'll take one for the team. It's great to be here.
Wes, thanks for coming on. And, just looking forward to a lot of the stuff we have to talk about. It's actually been a quiet news week, which is usually scary in the IT world, but we have had so much stuff going on this year that I'm not surprised at some point we had to have a bit of a lull. But there were some good things going on in the tech industry, so we're going to see those and run through them as always. And remember, if there's anything out there happening that you want us to talk about, make sure that you reach out to us through our social media channels. You can always tweet us, Facebook us. I don't know,
Facebook
whatever
page,
crazy.
Absolutely. We got it all.
Whatever social media methodology you can use to reach out to us, certainly do so. We'd love to hear from the viewers that are out there.
Definitely.
All right. Well, without any further ado, let's jump into our news. And because Peter's not here, I get to pick the order of the articles, and I choose to start with Linux today. So we're going to jump right off with CentOS 7 release 1804 is out, which doesn't sound terribly significant, but a couple of weeks ago, actually a couple of months ago now, we announced that Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or RHEL 7.5, came out. And there's always a bit of lead time between when RHEL updates and when CentOS and all the other derivative distros get updated. So now that update is out. If you are running CentOS 7.4 and you've been dying to get a hold of some of the new things that came out in RHEL 7.5, now is your chance. It's a major release. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't say it's major. It's not like we went to CentOS 8, right? But as far as sub-releases go, it's pretty significant. They added a lot of interesting things, increased stability. It is a long-term support model, so definitely one that a lot of people will leverage out there. So if you've been waiting on it, it is now done. And since CentOS 7.5, or I want to call it 7.5, and they chose not to do that. They just called it Build 1804. But since it is now done, you'll start to see some of the other things like Scientific Linux is also coming out. Amazon will update their Linux AMI, and so you'll start seeing more and more of them coming along. So if you run CentOS, definitely check that out. And the article here that I'm referencing is from Phoronix, where they have a ton of great Linux news where you can stay on top of it, but definitely something to see.
Any kind of features? Like, what are they? Is it bug fixes? You say stability and stuff? What kind of features do we have?
A lot of it was the new kernel, and actually in a microscopic font here, they have what's kind of new. The big features, it all mirrors what we announced back when RHEL 7.5 was out. So GNOME was updated to 3.28. There were a few other tweaks to the installer that happened. They rolled out some virtualization additions. So like the newest VirtualBox, the virtualization integrations were built into the kernel. The Linux kernel, and I don't want to speak out of hand here, I believe it's 4.14 now, and I was hoping to just spot that really quick as I glanced across this crazy page, but I don't see it anymore. So anyhow, there's that. They sum up the major changes in one little sentence. That's not really... Actually, they do exactly what I'm saying right here, which is, check out the RHEL 7.5 release notes.
There you go.
So anyhow, those are some of the big things, and we announced that a few months back. But the main things were the new kernel, which means new stability. Mm. For me, the GNOME update was a big deal. That certainly
Are you a GNOME
helped.
flavor guy?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Over KDE?
Yeah, and they've been a bit behind on handling high DPI monitor stuff, and that's been across a number of UIs. So that's been getting better and better with each one.
I think I've talked to you before, and there is some of the interfaces that you don't particularly care for. So you're a known person.
Yeah.
And when I say don't particularly care for, I mean disdain.
Yeah, and it's not like I pick favorites, right, Wes?
No, not at all. Never,
Yeah.
never.
Well, you know, everybody's got their own little thing.
You know, what's kind of funny, Don, is that the Linux or the CentOS update 1804, it's one better than the new Windows Creator update.
Oh, yeah, which is 1803.
So they wanted to be just one, I don't know, digit better.
Are they measuring from the same release date?
I don't know. Hopefully
I
not.
wonder. With
CentOS as a service, yeah, we'll see how that works.
Well, with Microsoft, their build numbers are however many days it's been since, what is it, since like DOS came out or something, right?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. The internal build version.
Yeah, and so every day that increments by one. I don't know what CentOS is using for their number. No, now I'm curious. I need to look it up.
I don't know, maybe the Mayan calendar or something?
Yeah, it's built around something. You know, when the founder of Red Hat bought a gremlin or something.
Oh, perfect.
All right. Well, that's about all we've got going on the Linux front. There were actually a couple other interesting things that happened in the Linux world. For example, there's been a high visibility GNOME bug that is been a memory leak that's been out of control. The team at Ubuntu, since they've switched back to GNOME as their primary UI, actually put some dollars into it and managed to solve that memory leak. So if that affects you, something to be aware of. That'll trickle out to the other distros in the near future, but hasn't yet. All right, a fun story, and this really, I guess, could have been our WTF article of the week, just like the crazy tech thing. Google rolled out a new AI feature over the last couple of weeks. And Wes, did you hear about this one?
No, I haven't. I've just been paying attention to the one in Azure, cognitive learning services, machine learning, and AI.
So if you're a fan of the podcast, you know I am sick and tired of hearing about artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on. And I've said multiple times that when I pick up the phone and I call a company, I hate it when a robot answers and I've got to press 1 for this menu and press 2 for that menu. You're interacting with a robot, and it's very painfully obvious that you're doing it. Well, Google has Google Duplex. It's an AI system, and they call it Duplex because it operates two ways. Like, while you're talking, it can be responding and calculating answers, and it can actually interrupt you while you're talking, which is a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
And so it gives you a more human experience, and they felt that it was so accurate that they actually activated it and started using it in some of their internal systems. So people were calling into Google, which when I first heard about this, I thought it was all lies, because when they said people call Google, I said, that's not possible. Like, Google doesn't listen to customers. You can't call them. But you would get these robots, and it wouldn't tell you. It wouldn't tell you that it was a robot. And some people got a little freaked out because it's like the Turing tests, where you might be able to pass the test, but you can still tell it's not a regular person on the other end. And here it was kind of really weird.
So it doesn't matter if it's a bot messaging service, AI, machine learning. You hear it. You hear an automated voice. You're like, no, I don't need your product. Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I've started to do, and I don't know about you, is when I get one of those menus,
I hit 0.
Well, so I had to call my fiber modem. Is it called a modem when you have fiber at home?
I think it still is.
Whatever the terminal connector is there. That device died at my house the other day, and so I had to call AT&T for service, and I got one of those robots. And when it says, what department would you like? I just immediately say, speak to a representative.
There you go.
And then it says, well, to better help you, we need to know whatever. And I say, speak to a representative. Like that's just what I say, and I don't want to mess around with menus. So with this though, if I didn't know it was a robot, if I thought it was a person, then maybe I would talk to it, and then I'd feel dirty for having talked to a robot.
I'm pretty rebellious. When I get one of those systems, I see how many buttons I can break until it gives up on me, and it actually just switches me right over to a live person there.
Well,
how many times can you hit star in a conversation until it'll give up?
So here's what Google's intent was. They wanted to make it where, let's say that you wanted to book an appointment, book a reservation at a restaurant. Okay, but you didn't want to actually call the restaurant. You could punch into your phone, hey, I want to book a reservation. And then the Google Duplex would call the restaurant for you and talk to a person and book the reservation. And then it would just show up on your calendar. You would never know that there was actually human interaction that happened somewhere on the back end. And the restaurant wouldn't necessarily know that it was a robot calling. It would just get a call. And so they released, I seriously doubt I can make this play well in my microphone, but they released a sound clip of this. And oh yeah, we're not gonna be able to hear that, are we? Yeah, well, anyhow, they released a sound clip of it, of this robot talking and basically telling you exactly what this would sound like, booking a salon appointment or whatever. And there was just global outrage. People went nuts. Like, you cannot have these robots calling us. And so Google ended up having to pull all this back. And
Sounds like they're afraid Skynet's going to go like self-aware or something.
well, it made me think of Google Glasses.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Remember when those came
Oh,
out?
yeah.
I never had them. Did you ever get them?
No.
So I thought they looked really cool.
Mhm.
I thought, wow, you could have it right here, and it's like a computer screen, and you could check your email and ignore your mom, that kind of stuff. That's perfect. But people like just socially hated it,
Mhm.
and if people saw somebody wearing Google Glasses, they immediately hated that person, and it kind of backfired. I think this stunt backfired as well.
I'd definitely be socially and awkward looking like having two pairs of glasses on because of the fact that I already have glasses. It wouldn't fit for me too well.
Well, I get it with Apple Watches.
Okay,
Right?
sure.
You don't have a smartwatch. I
No.
don't either. But you're talking to somebody,
Mhm.
and they get an email, and what do? They look at the wrist
Yep.
to see what the email is. Well, I'm thinking, oh, they're in a hurry to get somewhere, or they don't want to hear what I'm saying.
Right.
Which, in a way, they don't if they're checking their email, I guess. So anyhow, this was it on a larger scale. So Google's AI blog, they have a good write up on it. It's worth a read. But they set out with the best of intentions, and it ended up just kind of exploding.
So it'll be the next Google Glass.
Yeah, I think it already is.
It already is.
Which they're trying to relaunch the Google Glass stuff, which is fun because then we can just take all the old stuff we used to make fun of it and reuse it.
Just reuse
So,
it. Yeah, you're making
it's
our
just a matter
jobs
of time.
easier.
Now, what will actually happen is next year Apple will release their glasses,
Yeah.
and it'll be revolutionary, and people will think it's great.
It'll just be
So,
magic.
yeah. All right. Next news article, we have Impending Doom.
All right.
This is always fun to
Yep.
report on.
Armageddon of the internet.
The internet is scheduled to die on June
That's
11th. The net neutrality rules in the United States will officially be repealed on June 11th. Now, what does that mean to us? Well, if you're in the U.S., it actually does mean something. If you're outside of the U.S., it actually doesn't mean all that much. So it's not that big of a deal. Inside of the U.S., it means that as of June 11th, the rules will be pulled back, and ISPs will officially be able to throttle, restrict,
right.
and charge extra for bandwidth however they choose.
Sure.
The reality is most of them do not have systems in place for that, so June 11th will probably fizzle. It'll be like Y2K.
Okay, yeah, it'll come, it'll go, and then all of a sudden the calendar, the date on the calendar changes, and we're just as good as we were yesterday.
A couple of things break.
Yeah.
Do you remember, where were you?
I know exactly where I
Y2K.
was. I was in Oldsmar, Florida. We were at a barbecue right down there when it happened. I remember waiting, and the clock ticked. And we're like, well, the cars, we still hear them moving. We still see planes going over, so we must be okay.
Yeah. That's kind of how this will be in the beginning. Now,
Right.
it could turn out to be horrible in 2 years from now where, it's like the old time long distance where you're paying 25 cents per megabyte as you try and get to a website. We'll see where it goes. But June 11th is that official date, so it'll be interesting to follow and see what's going on there. I could report on the number of different agencies that are working to stop this, but it doesn't really matter because they can't stop it. Like, it will happen. So what'll have to happen is new laws will have to get passed, and we're at least a year out for those. So we'll hear more about that when it's a little more relevant.
Now, do you think they're going to start, I mean, in your opinion, and I know that behind the scenes you've built a lot of networks, you think they're going to start like trending on your information or something and then saying, okay, well, I know that you're watching a lot of Netflix or Hulu. We could see a lot of that streaming content and then start throttling you potentially based on that? Or is this just going to be more like I don't know, shared node by shared node, like a cluster of people within a community or something?
No, what I think will happen, and who am I, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
whatever. But I think it'll end up being like the mobile providers, right? Verizon did this a few years ago. I know T-Mobile does it as well, where if you fire up on your phone Netflix and you start to watch a movie, right? You're not getting the straight up full quality video from Netflix. That Verizon and T-Mobile will intercept that traffic, and AT&T might do it also. I'm not trying to pick on one provider over another.
Sure.
They intercept that video, and they reduce the quality of it because they know you're watching on a cell phone. You don't need 4K video on a cell phone. So they scale it down to 720p or even smaller, or they at least lower the bit rate from 5 megabit down to 1 megabit bit rate, which honestly most people can't tell the difference. And I'm saying most people because I know some of you guys are videophiles out
Right,
there, and you're
yep.
probably, oh, I know. I can't tell the difference.
Gotcha.
So they reduce the quality so it takes some of the burden off of their wireless network, right? And then they send it down to you. So they're kind of manipulating that traffic. And I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing that. Like, at home, I have gigabit fiber,
Mhm.
right? That doesn't mean I get a gigabit of bandwidth all the time.
Right. You're still sharing your piece of the pie.
And I'll bet we start to see packages where they say, like, hey, here's the value package. And if
Mhm.
you do this, yeah, we do content throttling, we reduce quality, whatever. But if you want the full quality, you can pay for the premium package or
Well,
whatever.
it's going to go into the garbage when in a year from now they bring back free nights and weekends. We haven't seen those in a while. And when your ISP starts saying, yeah, you can watch everything you want starting at 7 o'clock Friday and lasting until 5 o'clock Sunday.
Wow, that's like a walk down memory lane.
That's exactly
I remember
it.
like
Oh man, I remember the first Ericsson I had. I couldn't wait till Friday night came because it was game on from there on out. Hopefully, that's not what's going to happen with our ISPs and providing us content.
yeah, and even the old dial-up services like AOL and Genie and stuff, those guys, they would have these free weekends. Or it wouldn't count against your minute total, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it could get that way.
Yeah.
I like to think that it won't because it wasn't like that before these rules were put in place.
Sure.
But we'll see. Definitely something to keep an eye on. I fully expect new laws will be put in place
Gotcha.
before too long. All right, let's get to something fun because laws are boring, Wes.
You're boring me, Don.
Let's see. We talked about Linux stuff. We talked about a few other things. Let's jump over to the Microsoft world.
All right.
All right. A while back, I can't remember exactly when. I think it was back in October. One of our crazy tech news of the week things was about a problem with some of the Microsoft Surface Pro tablet, laptop, tablops, whatever.
Yeah,
they're
there
called.
we go. Just do what I do. Say Le Tablephone.
Le
Then it
Tablephone.
takes care of every little device
And
you
it sounds
have.
French, so people
does,
assume
that's
it's
right.
fancy. So anyhow, the Microsoft Surface Pro for Le Tablephones,
There we
the
go.
screens would start to flicker, and what we reported on was that I kind of found out if you stick the thing in the freezer.
No.
We actually played the video. That you stick in the freezer and you let it freeze for not long. I'm really just like 30 seconds, and you take it back out, and all of a sudden the flicker was gone, and it would work for a while. And if it started acting up again, you chuck it back in the freezer. It was a bizarre
Doesn't
story.
only work for batteries. Apparently, it works for Surface Pros. too.
Yeah. And let me throw out a quick word of caution here.
Disclaimer.
I think I mentioned this before. There is a ton of moisture and humidity in a freezer, even though most of it's in the form of ice. There's a ton of it. It is not a good idea to put electronic devices in the freezer. The guy in the video, he had used some kind of like bag he put it in, but even then, like moisture can condensate on the inside as well. So not a good idea. But Microsoft did acknowledge there was a problem. And they've been working to do a software fix for months. They keep pushing fix after fix, and they can't solve it. This week, they threw in the towel. And
Really?
Microsoft said, that's it. We can't fix it. So if you have a Surface Pro 4 with the flickering screen, even if you're out of warranty, Microsoft will now replace that screen for you. So they are taking care of it, which is good. It's a shame it took them this long.
Give a hats off to Microsoft. I mean, we pick on them a lot too when things go wrong, but hey, get a little credit when things go right. They're at least making good on the problem.
Oh,
there it is, right there too.
If I had just scrolled down on this article, this is on The Verge,
the
and The
power
Verge
of the
shows
scroll wheel,
there's the guy.
Don.
He's sticking it in his freezer, and
No
see
kidding.
the screen stopped flickering immediately, and he leaves it in there for a few moments, but it actually flickered a little bit right there as he jams it in. But hey, it's a crazy story. I do think it is a shame. Imagine, Wes, that you spent $1,400 on one of these laptops, and it was your only computer.
Yeah.
And the screen starts flickering like that, and you have to run like that for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
How long do you keep a computer? 3 years?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're IT guys. We
Right.
are usually on a shorter scale.
But sometimes you upgrade them, with being IT guys. But
6
not
months,
this.
that's a huge percentage of the time you own that device. And to
Mhm.
have a crappy screen like that on what's supposed to be a premium device,
Yeah.
that's not.
Yeah, we had one of a lady that works in another company that in our building here. She had a Dell laptop, and the Dell laptop started doing its crazy screen flicker too, and it was brand new. So for personal experience, I know she hated it. So I couldn't imagine somebody paying $1,400 for this, it being their primary go-to, and they can't use it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty horrible.
My father-in-law had an Xbox 360 that started doing the red ring of death.
Oh no.
and where it flashes the red ring and it won't boot, and that's it. And my brother-in-law had said, "Well, I can fix it for you," and he said, "No, you can't." And my brother-in-law said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, I got so mad I threw it in the pool." And so he just finally reached that point of rage and chucked it in the pool. But sometimes you can't fix things in software. At least they are doing something about it. So if you have a Surface Pro 4 and it's affected with the screen flicker, it's worth a call to Microsoft. See if you can get that fixed. All right, more in Microsoft news. 2 weeks ago, I had to do a admission of fault on the podcast because one of my predictions was I didn't think Microsoft was going to put out another version of Server. So a couple of weeks ago, we announced where Microsoft actually did say they are going to be releasing Windows Server 2019. The insider preview builds have started rolling out.
Okay.
I don't know, Wes, have you had a chance to mess with them?
No, not the new server at all.
So it's interesting, and I'm actually starting to learn more as time goes on about how things have kind of changed a little bit, that we initially said that they were going to release it and it was going to be a server core install only.
Oh, okay.
So when you install Windows Server 2019, you
GUI,
just get the command line or power. It's not PowerShell. It is just the command line.
Yeah, it's command line, which is interesting.
And I'm going to say no GUI, but it actually is a GUI loaded. It's just all you have is a command prompt in it. But basically limited to core services install, which honestly, in this day and age, core services installs are all you should be doing. Now, that gave me a question, though, which is, what if I use terminal services or remote desktop services?
That's right.
If you set up a terminal server, you need people to have a desktop, and a core services install doesn't give you that. So I didn't know if that was going to work in 2019 or not. Well, in the Windows Server 2019 Insider Preview build 17666.
Okay.
So,
wow, it is the apocalypse.
Yeah, so an unfortunate series of numbers there. But with the current build, it has the desktop experience packaged into it, as well as that server core install. Now, if they've packaged the desktop experience in it, that means that it basically supports GUI installs now.
Yes, you can do the server install and then come back and install the GUI management tools after, just like a traditional core install. If you
I would imagine, yeah. But that's not proven yet. I haven't seen that because in the past there were really three different modes. There was the core services mode, there was the server with GUI mode, and then there was the desktop experience mode.
Right.
And desktop experience added a lot of extra software that you didn't normally want on a server.
Right.
So desktop experience mode is not the same as just regular server GUI. We'll see how it all shapes out.
And I know you really don't like that because I've seen you build up in the past. We've worked together for a while now. I've seen you build up Centos servers, and you go the minimalistic approach. And when I say that, I've seen this guy build a server that operates the whole thing in 200 megs of RAM. So you're a very minimalistic approach.
Well, to me, it's about, first off, performance, right? I don't want to waste resources on graphic effects and things like that. And then the second thing is about attack surface.
True.
The more stuff you run, the bigger an area that can be attacked. If I'm standing up a web server, I don't need Samba, or SMB. I don't need anything like that.
Sure.
And unfortunately, Windows comes packed with that stuff. So core services installs at least get us a little bit closer.
Very good.
So do remember that the Windows Insider previews are free. So if you are learning or just interested in seeing the Windows Server 2019, you can sign up for the Insider program, download those ISOs. If you're a Linux or Mac hardcore user and don't want to switch, that is perfectly fine. Fire them up in a virtual machine. That's how I usually run them. And, you can get in there and mess around and experiment. It's a great way to learn.
Yeah, your test lab, you build you a little sandbox. And what's the worst thing happens? You reset the sandbox, fill it with some new sand, and go ahead and just kind of get in there and don't be afraid to do what I do. I can break a network with the best of them, right? But I can also learn from that experience and help to try fix things. So it's nice to have a free lab environment like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm talking about Windows Server 2019 because that was the one I talked about. But Wes, I know you were telling me earlier about Windows 10 as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Windows 10, the version 1803 came out, and it's a little bit behind schedule. Because we know that Microsoft for a while now has been on this Windows as a service, right? So they have a release in March, and then they have a release in September, right? We can see that in the past, right? 1703, 1709. They were a little late on this one because it says 1803, and you would expect it to come out in March, and they just pushed for it to just be available in April, and it was literally April 30th that it went live. So it is a new thing, and it brings in a lot of new features, things like timeline, nearby sharing, things like improvements in the Settings app. And the Settings app, for those of you that maybe are not familiar with it, right? Microsoft in Windows 10 is supporting two interfaces to work with your computer and configure it, right? We got the traditional control panel, and then we got the new Windows settings space there. And it's a little lunky, right? And I know, like Mike and Cherokee, our other hosts, are big on Windows 10, and you can just hear, where do I find this setting and where do I find that setting? So they've kind of improved that as well. What else too? Things like Edge, they're trying to improve. One of the things I really like about the new Windows 10 security stance is that Windows Defender Security Center. They've really packed in a lot of stuff. And honestly, a lot of that stuff's already been there, but it's been transparent to the user, and we don't really control it now. They're kind of leveraging it. But then again, there are some not so good things, and that's kind of where we're at here with this one right here.
You know, before we jump into these biggest problems and complaints part, I want to get your opinion on something, Wes. You mentioned Windows Defender, and how do you feel about Windows Defender? Like, do you rely on that as your host-based intrusion prevention, or do you use a different product on top of that?
All right, so Symantec, Kaspersky, all of them, they're not going to like me when I say this. I use Windows Defender strictly. I do. But then again, I also make sure that I run scans on a regular basis. And I've always found that I combine things like Windows 10's Windows Defender with things like MRT. And if you're not aware of like the MRT, right, that's the malicious software removal toolkit. And honestly, I find that it does really well. They're doing really good with giving you more control over things like App Guard and being able to lock and, really just quarantine portions of memory so it, exploitive code can't get out of those pieces of memory. And we've seen this. This isn't new technology. It's just the fact that some of it's no longer transparent, while some of it might be new to Windows 10. Application Guard is just doing things like randomized memory locations and stuff, and they've really leveraged control over it. So to get back to your question, I have had no problems with Windows Defender, and it has worked amazing. The only time I ever had a problem with Windows Defender is when somebody got it on their computer and they were trying to sell it to them. But then we knew something was wrong with that version of Windows Defender.
All right, well, let's get back to the Windows Central article. So what Windows Central did is they kind of did a survey, and they tried to put together what the top update problems and complaints were. And if you've listened to the podcast over the last few months, I know Peter and I have been making fun of the macOS High Sierra update because of the numerous problems that are out there. Windows is no exception. So we've got a handful of those. For example, installation problems.
That's right. Yeah. Now with the installation problems, this is kind of isolated, and they make mention in this article. So I don't want some people to go, "Oh my God, I shouldn't install this." It's really limited to Alienware devices. For some reason, they're having some issues, and they even make mention of the models, and you can see some of the models in the article. But some of the other incompatibility issues are the Intel Toshiba SSD. So it's very, very specific problems to very specific vendors and products.
Yeah, now the SSD one, that was a big deal because they started pushing the update, and then they actually had to make a change on their side to do a check. And if you have an Intel SSD or a Toshiba, then they actually stop the update going to your machine. And to my knowledge, Microsoft haven't reactivated it yet, have they, Wes?
I think they just acknowledged it, and it's kind of like one of the things maybe with the Surface Pro where they're working on it, but maybe don't have an active fix right now. Yeah. Some of the other things too, app freezing problems. A lot of you'll see, and this seems to be with the apps freezing. It seems to be browser based. You'll see Chrome in there. You'll see Firefox. Mozilla's Firefox is in there, and Don's favorite software there, Slack, is in there. It has it's been having some issues. In-house apps that are having some problems too. So it's not just third-party stuff. In-house apps like Cortana have been having issues. Me personally, I think she had issues since she's been put in the operating system, but apparently those issues aren't going away. Other in-house things that have been having some problems too, the Windows Store apps not being able to download and install them. So it's not just the third-party things that we see. We say, oh, well, it must be a problem with Chrome, or maybe it's a problem with Mozilla. Well, not really. It's down there somewhere in the operating system, because some of the stuff that they have baked right into the operating system is also seeing problematic issues.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these problems are pretty typical with the release of a new OS, especially when you have diverse hardware that's out there. So as with any major update, if you're deploying this in your business, you may want to sit tight a little bit, make sure everything shakes out. Definitely test out on a small number of machines before deploying out to your entire company. If you are a home user, by and large, it's not a big deal. You can deploy and things go pretty smooth.
Absolutely. There's one thing that I would like to mention, and I want our viewers to be aware of. They talk about setting issues, right? So, we talk, especially in enterprise realm, that when you have like operating system migrations and stuff, you really want to. Some people want to keep system configuration and user state. That how do the users have their operating systems configured, and it's losing things like that. Where for some reason, some people will disable fast startup, and after the upgrade, it re-enables it. Things like microphone and camera issues, apps not being able to access, speakers being, your sound card, maybe you have multiple sound card sources, right? And you disable one and it'll turn them all on. Now, I don't know, Don, honestly, how much of this is related to when you do your upgrade. Are you paying attention to keeping your files and settings? Or are you starting from a clean install? Because when we do our upgrades, they can also become PC refreshes if we're not careful, if we're not paying attention. We just kind of click through. So just make sure that if you're doing this, if you get to a point in your upgrade screen where it says, hey, do you want to keep your files and settings? Make sure that you're choosing the right one, because in honesty, that might just be one of those Jiminy Crickets things where we kind of just clicked on through.
All right. Well, I think that's a good wrap up for Microsoft news. Let's jump over to security. And again, shockingly, there just wasn't an outrageous amount of security news this week. So that's a good sign. And no major breaches that I'm aware of this week. But there was a pretty good hubbub about secure email, right? Encrypted email. If you are leveraging PGP, which is pretty good privacy, or GPG, the GNU Privacy Guard, or if you're using S-MIME. So pretty much all the major ways.
All encrypted email.
Yeah. So if you are using encrypted email, researchers have discovered 2 different attacks, technically 3 different attacks, that they can use to exfiltrate the plain text data of that email, even if it's encrypted. Now, if it's a digitally signed email, the digital signatures are still protected. You can still validate the authenticity of the email. But if it is encrypted as well, they actually do have a way to get at that information. It's not the most graceful of attacks. It actually requires a good bit of man-in-the-middle work, so they have to be able to inject themselves into your network. But basically, it is a pretty flawless way for them to be able to jump in.
Is it a key grab or a key strip or something like that?
So that's what I thought first off, right? When people started talking about the exploit. And so then I had to go and read on it. And the article that I'm linking to here is from Motherboard.
Okay.
And they do a pretty good write-up here for normal people, but they don't really go into the details. I mean, they actually show a video. But the best place is from the EFF. They put up they did a whole website dedicated to this. It's efail.de. So efail.de. And if you go to efail.de, which I guess would be German.
Okay.
All right. Well, anyhow, if you go here, they actually give a big walkthrough on all 3 of the types of attacks. Although they just label it as 2 attacks. They group the other 2 together. But the simplest form works on a really simple idea. It says, look, if you get an encrypted email, right? Well, let's say I'm going to send Wes an encrypted email. So I write my email up. I put all my deep, dark secrets in there, and then I, pipe it into PGP, right? So it gets encrypted.
Okay.
And then I stuff that in an email. Well, it's just a regular old email. It's got a regular header at the top. It's got a regular footer if I chose to have one down at the bottom. It just happens to have all this encrypted junk in the middle of it.
Okay.
That just looks like ciphertext, and I send the email to Wes. Now, anybody on the planet can intercept that email, and the header can be read and the footer can all be read in plain text. No crazy hacker skills needed there. The ciphertext in the middle, well, it's ciphertext. They can't decrypt that. They would have to have Wes's private key in order to decrypt that data. So that's safe even if somebody intercepts it. Well, what the attackers or the researchers found is that they could take the email and modify it. And they do a great job of showing that here on efail.de. So basically, they've got an email, and here's the header. This is the stuff that's in plain text. You have to have who it's from and who it's to and the subject line, like that kind of stuff. I guess subject line can be encrypted, but normally this is going to be stuff that is plain text, right? And then you get into the actual body of the message. Now, the body of the message is typically going to be this ciphertext. It's going to be a wall, just tons, thousands of letters and numbers, capital and lowercase and all that, just a giant encrypted mess. But what they found was that they could stick at the very beginning, in the unencrypted part, the beginning part of an image tag. So this is HTML, hypertext markup language. They open up that bracket with IMG.
Specify the source.
And the source is a server they control.
Okay.
Right? And so in this case, they're pointing it to efail.de, but you point it to a server that you control, and then you don't close the tag. Right?
Oh.
So that tag is left open.
Okay.
What follows is all the encrypted mess. And at the end of the encrypted data, they close that tag. Well, what happens is a lot of email clients, and this would be Mozilla Thunderbird, Apple Mail, Microsoft Outlook was not in the list, but a number of email clients will receive the email, and they will apply PGP or GPG or SMIME to decrypt the contents first. Then they'll view the HTML and render that as active content, like loading an image and a signature or whatever. When they do that, it's going to send a message out to that attacker's server. And in the URL will be image, source, blah, 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 followed by all of the encrypted text that's now plain text. It's been decrypted. It gets sent to their server, and it's now in their server logs, and they can read it at their leisure.
That's pretty creative.
So it is creative.
And scary.
It's not a flaw in the encryption protocol, right? They're not able to break the encrypted data. They're just waiting for you to decrypt it first, and then you're rocketing out that connection to the other side, and you've effectively given up your data, right? That's a problem with the email client.
Okay.
The clients shouldn't be doing that. And years ago, Microsoft made a big deal out about not loading images and stuff by default. You have to choose to download it, that you trust the sender or whatever before it'll load. But trusting a sender, anybody can forge who the sender is.
Sure.
And so, you could be doing this, automatically opening up images or image tags.
I mean, isn't that the basis of all great phishing scams?
Yeah. I mean, it really is.
Sure.
So that's pretty low key. There is a second form of this that actually does abuse the way the protocol works. It's called a Gadget Attack, which is far more sophisticated, where they're able to basically just start spamming zeros at the header, and then still inserting that image tag in there. It's basically the same type of attack, just applied a slightly different way, and that's all going to result in you basically exfiltrating your own data. Like after you decrypt it, you are sending it to the server log somewhere.
So it looks like they're using like the cipher frame block mode of operation. They're manipulating. Wow, that's
sort of,
intense,
it's a little different because instead of at the packet level, they're doing it at the email level, but it's the same idea. So it's really cool. If you want to learn more about it, go to efail.de. You can read their write-up on it. It's really cool stuff. Well, I mean, it's not cool if it gets used against you, but it's really cool to learn how it's done and kind of see the logic behind it. The email clients that are mentioned in the article, they're all being patched right now to take into account for this, but it does show one of the big weaknesses with encrypted data, that it's easy for you to inadvertently send this data out once you've decrypted it. You always have data in motion and data at rest, and you'd think that secure email would protect you at both, in motion and at rest. But the moment you decrypt it to view it, you've now removed all of those protections.
Sure,
so that's why in-memory attacks and attacks like these are really important to be aware of. All right, that is literally the only security article that I had for the week that I at least thought was significant enough to talk about.
Very anticlimactic this week, right?
I know. So let's jump into your neck of the woods, Wes. I know we had you on the show a few weeks ago to talk about the new Intel CPUs.
Yeah, I think it was the i9 series, and what is good about that? And we found out at the end,
bigger than the i7.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, we found out you can stick with an i7. It's more of a status symbol, at least at the desktop level.
Yep, and one of the big things that they were promoting was that these were going to be smaller, potentially smaller, like 10 is it nanometer?
10 nanometer processors.
10 nanometer processors, and that the smaller processor is usually the more efficient, like energy efficient it is. So that's kind of the big push behind these. Well, they announce stuff like this all the time. It just takes a long time to make it to market, but now we're starting to see articles.
That's
They
right.
are making it to market, right?
They are, and if you've been following, the whole Moore's law type thing and Intel's TikTok approach, this is just another one of those ones that's been a little bit behind. They've promised it at a certain time. If we go back, just to go back a little bit. I mean, we go all the way back to Sandy Bridge, but I know we keep it a little bit shorter here. Broadwell, right? That's 14 nanometers. It was delayed. Well, Haswell was delayed. Broadwell was delayed. Skylake, Kaby Lake were on time. Cannon Lake was another one that they announced it and they released it finally 2 years after the initial release. So it is out there. And it is one of those ones that we are just starting to see it. And it's a dual core. Again, it's a 4-thread CPU and it's got a base clock of 2.2 gigahertz. But stacked side by side to some of the earlier processes, it doesn't really make sense as to why I would want to just run out and buy this thing, other than status quo.
Yep. So the article I was showing a moment ago was from Engadget.
Engadget,
They were talking about it
it's a
being released.
great article.
But Anantech has where you can actually buy these laptops now. So there's a Lenovo laptop, Lenovo IdeaPad 330, which is priced just at $450.
Yeah, and it's not here in the States yet. Let's be clear on that one. This one was we're first seeing it on the Chinese market there, and we should see it hopefully. Well, I say hopefully if you actually want to purchase it. If you don't, then it doesn't really matter. But we should see it coming out here in the States very soon. So we're just now starting to see it.
And so on Anantech's announcement, they have the specs for it listed, and they seem pretty impressive. But you mentioned something to me before the show, and I want to highlight it here in the podcast. If you stack it side by side against the previous generation of processor, we see something kind of interesting. So, Wes
and we
sent
both
me,
found stuff too, because you found something with the diameter of the package.
Wes sent me this, which is on the Intel architecture site. So this is straight from Intel, and they are stacking the latest i3-8121U processor, which is a 10 nanometer. So it's showing it's at the new 10 nanometer.
10 nanometer, yeah.
And comparing it against the i3-8130U, so the previous version, which is 14 nanometer.
Yep.
And so, immediately, what's better about this new one? Well, obviously, it is 4 nanometers smaller.
It
right?
is. It is. That makes a lot of difference. It just doesn't relate to spec difference.
and that really shows up because once you start scrolling down and looking at the comparison, these things are near identical, and in some places actually worse. So like the max turbo
frequency, that's what I've seen.
It goes down, down from 3.4 down to 3.2 gigahertz. So it actually reduced, but on a lot of it, it is the same. You really don't see a whole lot of variation. Now, Intel hasn't fully populated
That's
this
right.
table
And
yet.
you made mention of that, because I was like, one of the in the Engadget article, they make a funny comment, and they've seen this before, so they already know. I didn't know. You told me is like, don't just assume a specification because a box is blank. It might be the fact that they just haven't released the information. Because I was thinking, well, God, they didn't even. Somebody was maybe they filled this chart out on Friday at about 4:30 before they left. Because some of the specs are still empty.
Yeah, but there are some areas where there's some improvement. I did find it interesting. Max memory size on both is still 32 gigs. Haven't really cranked up there. But on the max memory bandwidth, that's gone up a bit from 34 gigabytes per second up to 41, almost 42 gigabytes per second. So good jump there.
And memory support, if you look at the blue area in there, the memory support is, a higher speed with the, it's supporting DDR4 versus DDR3, which we know DDR4 is going to be just more lower power, right? And it's a mobile platform.
Well, now they both support DDR4. This is the LP DDR4.
Oh, that's right. That's right. The low power DDR4,
yeah.
and that was it. Is the fact that it's lower power consumption, which is what we want.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing these into the cheaper laptops because, well, you need reduced power to drag that battery life out, and then you'll see that pop up more.
Yeah, but man, can you imagine the marketing staff? How hard of a time they had?
that.
Hey, we made a processor. It's brand new, and it's slower. But, I'm sure they've got reasons. They've been in the business now 50 years. They know what the heck they're doing. So, it is interesting, and it'd be interesting to see. Now, they had if we scroll down to, for instance, or maybe up, I'm not sure where we are, processor graphics here. We don't know about the integrated graphics because, like you had mentioned, they haven't filled it out, so let's not assume here. But, they've been doing this thing where they've actually taken the Radeon chipset and kind of integrated AMD, right, ATI, whatever you want to say, AMD and integrated that into the Intel, CPU here. So we don't see any specs right here, but I can only imagine since it's a mobile platform, we're going to see the integrated GPU. They just haven't filled it.
Well, and I'm assuming too, and let me tell you the little hints that I kind of see. One of them is the increased PCI Express lanes.
Yes.
Right. So we go from 12 Express lanes to 16, 4 extra Express lanes. It's not like you're adding more PCI Express ports into a laptop, right? So what's consuming these? I've got to imagine it's discrete graphics, or it wouldn't be discrete at that point, would it? If it's integrated.
Well, this is a mobile line.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and so you can see that they're probably gearing this towards gamers, hence the integrated graphics.
Yep. And then the other thing, where was it on here, was that the package size is bigger, and you mentioned that a moment ago. I jokingly said, why is the 10 nanometer better than the 14 nanometer? It's that it's smaller, right?
Right.
But if you find the actual dimensions of this thing, which I am unable to find now, you'll see where the physical dimensions of the chip package have actually gotten larger. Here it is. From 42 millimeters up to 45 millimeters for that package size. So that also makes me think that we're going to see those Radeon graphics pop in because
they get more space.
Something has to occupy that extra space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you reduce that size, the joke on the Engadget site was maybe they haven't figured out how to make the GPU small enough to fit on the smaller 10 nanometer package yet. But when you caught that, it does make sense. We've got more. We still got plenty of real estate. I say we like I own it, but they've got plenty of real estate on the base of the die. So maybe they can.
Now watch. When we get our hands on our first one, it'll have a 3 millimeter bar with just the Intel logo on it on the side. That's it.
That'd be
just
great.
Marketing. So we'll see where that one ends up. But this is one more in a long line of chips that have come from Intel. And Wes, you had shown me this when we were talking before the show, which was Intel's kind of timeline of chips, and you can kind of see how over the years it's gotten progressively smaller and smaller and smaller, while also getting progressively more and more complex until we get to where we are today. This is a massive chart.
It really is, and there's a downloadable PDF if you want. Now, see, before I ever got into computing, I was a massive history buff. I just always like history, and now that I've been in computing, now I like to blend the two. I like computer history, so it's really interesting to see. If you look down at the actual specifications, there's the 1971 processor, and I can't remember, that was at 80 something, right? Maybe, I don't know. We could scroll down and they tell you exactly what the name of that processor is. Oh, 404. So if you look, the manufacturer, the transistors on that, 2,300 transistors. Take a guess as to what 2012 if we scroll sideways.
It's in the millions, right?
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It's going to be more than millions, isn't it?
Yeah.
1.4
billion. So, things have gotten smaller. And, well, you guys know out there, the smaller, the more stuff we can put on there and the closer we can get it together, just like we teach in some of our A-plus classes. When you got a highway that gets shorter, it takes less time to get from point A to point B.
And this timeline ends 6 years ago.
That's right. And that is the other thing that I should mention. You won't see any of and let me come back for some of my dates, right? You're not going to see the Haswell on there, Broadwell, Skylake, KB Lake, Cannon Lake, because all of those are after the 2012. Yeah.
But the thought that they could fit 1.4 billion of anything in a 22 nanometer package,
that they could even count that,
is pretty impressive.
It is
versus that 2300 you were talking about earlier, which actually it wasn't even measured in nanometer. I keep saying nanometer. Is it nanomicrons? What?
It's nanometers. Yeah,
it is nanometer.
1 billionth of a meter. Same thing for fiber optics cores.
Okay. All right, well, that's it on the Intel side and all we've got there. Now, we've covered all the major vendors at this point. We did Microsoft. We did a little bit of networking. We talked about cloud a little bit. We've kind of been across the board. We talked about Apple. We haven't actually... No, we didn't talk about Apple, did we? Yeah, that's right, we don't have
they
much
kind
for
of
Apple.
been a snooze fest this week. We haven't really found something, and you usually find something on, Apple rumors or something like that, and I haven't really seen anything out there.
So my guess is, there have been a few things floating around. They've got some new betas that are out, like a 6th round of betas for macOS 10.14.
They really like that fish.
And iOS update coming out, but all that's kind of in a weird holding pattern. I suspect because we've got WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference, coming up.
Maybe they're hush-hush. And
and it is June 4th through 8th. Okay. So we are just a hair under 2 weeks out, or over 2 weeks out.
I'm marking my calendar.
For that one. And they always do their big software announcements there. So things are probably going to go pretty quiet with Apple. People speculate on what's coming up. Maybe we'll see iOS apps running on macOS coming, maybe not.
Yeah. Maybe we'll see higher Sierra.
higher.
You know, we got Sierra, High Sierra, and then we'll have Higher Sierra. I don't know.
The Damn Yankees song, "Can You Take Me High Enough?" that just popped into my head. Like,
Sorry,
Apple
man.
should license that.
You're welcome.
And all right, well, so not much to report on the Apple front, which is good and bad, right? No major security concerns in the last week.
We got hardware in there talking about Intel as well. So, all right.
All right. Well, Wes, I think that is a pretty good run through of the various news articles.
It's been fun, yeah. Yeah, I mean, even it's a little less on the, the news side, it's still fun nonetheless. And when you start talking hardware, I'm like, I have a squirrel moment. We're talking hardware. Let's get into it.
There's a lot of fun stuff.
That's right. That's right. So thanks for having me.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope you guys enjoyed it, but this is going to wrap up this week's episode of Technado, the IT podcast brought to you by ITProTV. Thank you guys for watching. And if you liked the podcast and you want more, be sure to like or friend us or favorite us or
Tweeterate.
Yeah, check us out on MySpace. I don't know, whatever it is that you do.
We better get out of here before we start showing our age.
I know. You fire up, find me on Friendster. And, so anyhow, be sure to like us and friend us and rate us, review us, and share it with your friends. We want to get the word out and kind of share technology with everyone we know. All right, Wes, thank you again for jumping in on the show.
It's been fun.
Kind of last minute notice for you, but you did well.
No, I love it. Anytime.
And for you guys out there in TV land, thank you for watching, and we'll see you back next week on Technado.